what's the difference between traditional problem solving and design thinking? And I like to approach it as having problem solving components, if you will. These are the things that you typically do as you're going through a problem solving process, which is you come up to some decision making. Yes, indeed, that island is the problem. You then have some form of collaboration, working with your colleagues, your teammates, or your clients, hopefully. Then you brainstorm, okay, how are we going to try and solve this problem? And then you start designing. Okay, we got a pretty good idea how we're going to solve this. Let's design the solution, whatever that may be. And then you have some outcomes from that design. Okay, here's our solution. We now have a swimming pool on an island. Great. Well, then underlying all of that in terms of problem solving is accountability. You got to get the work done. You can't let brainstorming go on too long. So if you can agree with me on just these basic 6 components of problem solving, then there's a way to look at it from traditional problem solving to design thinking. Okay, so again, decision-making, collaboration, brainstorming, designing outcomes all through this. But traditional says, look, we're going to perform these in a vacuum. And a lot of times problem solving is based on assumption. My website's not really pretty. I'm not getting a lot of traffic because it's not pretty. Okay, that's a start. It's an assumption. I'm not getting the best employees. There's just not enough talent out there, or it's not the good talent. Okay, that might be an assumption as well. We need to challenge those types of assumptions. Okay, collaboration. Again, in traditional, oftentimes, and I don't know what all of your experiences are, but when you work in larger companies, you often get siloed. Designers stay with the designers, developers stay with the developers, managers stay with managers. And what happens? There's no trust between the teams or the peers. Okay, you get to brainstorming. All right, we're sort of collaborating. Okay, how do we come up with ideas? Well, what happens is all wild or fun or outlandish ideas get dismissed. Oh, that's a terrible idea. That'll never work. Things like that. Or why would we do something like that? It's too expensive. Okay, well, let's keep going. Designing, again, like the splitting of roles, designers often get treated like a job title and not as a partner. Like, join in. How do we bring everybody like a coder or a manager and a designer together to truly understand what the problem is? And lastly, outcomes. In a traditional analytical approach, you usually have these rigid metrics or goals. And I'll give you an example in a minute, but really what it says is, I am not going to make an outcome. I'm not going to create my solution, or I'm not going to show off my solution until it's perfect. And you might have heard of the saying, perfection is going to kill the good. It's the enemy of good. Sometimes you just got to get the good out there because you can learn from it and you can do some good. So that's where design thinking comes in and says, all right, look, we know that there's problems in traditional decision making. So we need to be more inclusive and informed. Now, I want to be careful with the word inclusive because it can mean many things to many people. But of the people who can help solve the problem, that's what I mean by keeping them inclusive. It doesn't mean you keep the designers to the very end. You get a bunch of coders that says, oh, we got to make this really robust, secure website. And it's completely unusable because they waited till the end for the designer to get involved. And so that's what I mean by being inclusive. And just because you're inclusive doesn't mean everyone gets their way, but everyone must get heard so that you can be informed that you're solving the right problem. So that brings me to collaboration. There are no silos. There's just co-creation and trust. And that means you can get to better brainstorming. Wild and fun ideas can flourish. And what I usually like to tell people is, yeah, of course, you're not going to create a rocket to solve your problem. Of course, that sounds outlandish or it might cost a lot of money, but don't tamp it down. Let's talk about it. There are no bad ideas, just priorities. And I'm going to talk more about what that means a little bit later. Designing is no longer done at the end. The designer is brought in along the way. They're treated as not only as a collaborator, but it's a cross-functional process. It doesn't mean the designer is left to do everything on their own. They're actually working with like a client and saying, hey, does this make sense? Or to the coder, hey, if I design this call to action button, is it going to break your code? Just having those simple pieces of dialogue that, design thinking really emphasize. And lastly, the outcomes, back to that perfect is the enemy of good. You replace perfect with MVP. You might have heard of this as minimal viable product. minimal viable audience. If you're trying to do some branding or marketing, but the intent here is to learn fast. I don't like the term fail fast if you've heard that, but get something out. Like if you're a logo designer, you're probably doing like 20, 50 iterations. Keep showing that, keep kicking that around. Maybe something makes sense versus, what you've done to perfection.